In the hush before dawn, the fields lay like a vast ocean of green and gray, each plant a small, stubborn island holding a secret. The story begins there, in those planted rows and in the hands that tended them, hands calloused by labor, hands inked with the soil of many seasons, hands that would soon be caught in a terrible transformation. This is the story of an invention that promised ease and prosperity, and, like a blade with two edges, cut deeper into the fabric of a nation than its maker ever intended. This is the story of Eli Whitney's cotton gin and the tangled web of progress, profit, and human cost that spun out from its teeth. Picture a young New England man, tidy and resolute, stepping away from the chalkboard and the discipline of apprenticeship. He carries with him a mechanical curiosity, a mind that sees friction and motion as language to be decoded. Eli Whitney is not a monster. He is an archetype of invention, bright, earnest, and convinced that mechanization can lift burdens. He is credited with a device that separated cotton fiber from its seeds, something that had always been painstakingly slow by hand. The gin, short for engine, was in concept simple. It promised speed where there had been tedium, productivity where there had been limitation. What Whitney could not have fully foreseen, though, was how a single machine would resonate through markets, laws, social systems, and human lives. His engine was a catalyst. It quickened not only cotton fibers, but also the momentum of trade, the appetite of industry, and the reach of entrenched economic interests. It stitched new seams into an existing garment of society, and those seams did not hold together the same way afterward. Before the invention, cotton was a labor of intimacy. Families worked together, picking and separating, a slow rhythm that set the pace of rural life. The slow method limited scale. Certain types of cotton, short staple varieties that grew well in inland soils, remained marginal because separating their seeds by hand was a monstrous task. Long staple cotton, grown in limited coastal zones, had been the primary source of usable fiber. Invention altered the rules. Whitney's gin made short staple cotton economical, transforming previously marginal land into lucrative cropland. From the perspective of the plantation owner, the math was irresistible. Land that had been considered ordinary could now be converted into fields of gleaming white bowls. Acreage expanded. The market responded. Mills in the north eagerly bought raw cotton. Textile factories in England fed the appetite for finished cloth. Money flowed in new directions, and with it, a new alignment of interests formed. Southern planters, northern merchants, and British textile capitalists entered into an implicit compact. The cotton gin did not speak any moral language, it spoke profit. It promised wealth to those who could use it. And yet there was a deeper, darker consequence, one that the manufacturer did not intend. At the heart of this transformation lay human beings. Enslaved people whose labor had always been coerced, but whose roles shifted dramatically once cotton became king. The gin multiplied the economic value of cotton-producing land and, by extension, the value of the labor force to work it. Where the gin increased productivity, the demand for hand labor to cultivate and harvest the expanding crops increased. Slavery, which had been present for centuries in the English colonies and their descendants, hardened into a vast, organized system. Families were broken to meet labor demands. People were bought and sold as assets. Wealth accumulation and human suffering, once only loosely connected, became intertwined in an institutional embrace. The United States Constitution had attempted a compromise on the matter of importation, prohibiting the transatlantic slave trade after 1808. Yet laws and economic incentives pull at societies like opposite tides. In the 15 years from 1793, the year of Whitney's invention, to 1808, the era saw an intense flurry of human trafficking. Ships set their prows toward Africa. Markets profitably exchanged human lives for cargo. Slave traders, driven by demand and by the legal windows still open to them during that interval, worked with a ruthless efficiency. Even as some Americans championed liberty and freedom in lofty rhetoric, other interests at the docks, in counting houses, and on plantation porches prioritized cotton over conscience. This contradiction, freedom proclaimed, enslavement practiced, became the central hypocrisy of the young republic. It grew until it became a festering wound in the national body, a canker that deepened and spread. The economic gains were real and substantial. Cities in the North prospered on the cotton trade. Merchants financed shipments, insurers underwrote risks, and factories transformed raw fiber into cloth that clothed millions. Every stage of that chain drew energy and capital from the field, and indirectly from the labor extracted by violence. It was a distributed system of benefit, where the immediate hands of labor might rarely touch the finished goods and seldom receive the profit they created. There is no tidy villain in this tale. Eli Whitney's invention was an instrument, a tool whose moral valence depends on context and usage. In the early days, Whitney himself pursued recognition and profit, entangled in patent battles and manufacturing ventures. He was a man of his time, operating within the market logic and racial norms that shaped American life. Yet, as the gin's effects rippled outward, it became more than a machine. It became a node around which powerful social and economic forces coalesced. To understand the magnitude of the change, imagine a map of the United States shifting in color. Territories once peripheral in the cotton economy suddenly shimmer with newfound value. The so-called Deep South, a band of states with rich soils and warmer climates, morphs into the cotton heartland. Rivers become arteries of commerce for bales of fiber. Towns grow up around ports and ginneries. The institution of slavery, which had earlier been constrained by geography and economics, migrates and grows into these new regions, becoming more deeply entrenched. The internal slave trade, domestic sales and movement of enslaved people within the United States expanded dramatically, as laborers were carried to new plantations, separated from kin, reshaping countless lives. The cotton gin, by altering the economics, altered the map of human suffering. And yet the story carries ironies. The North, which would later be cast as the bastion of abolitionism, benefited economically from the cotton economy. Northern mills turned Southern cotton into textiles, creating jobs and wealth in New England towns that enjoyed the sale of finished goods. Political alliances hardened, not on principle, but on practical interdependence. Cotton created a network of stakeholders. Everybody had a piece of the economic pie. This diffuse benefit made political compromise more difficult. Calls for abolition encountered not only moral resistance, but economic inertia, a web of self-interest that defended the status quo. The Civil War, when it finally came, ripped through that web. It was a conflict that had many causes: state sovereignty, tariffs, political culture. But at its heart was the question of whether a nation founded upon liberty could continue to strike bargains with bondage. The war was a violent tearing of the national fabric, and its outcome ended slavery as a legal institution. Yet its wounds were deep, and the social aftershocks, economic dislocation, the contest over civil rights, the long arc of systemic inequality, did not vanish with the Emancipation Proclamation or with a new set of laws. For over 60 years before the war, and for many decades after, the canker had grown and left its mark. The gin had contributed to an expansion that transformed an economy and, tragically, extended a human atrocity. To view Whitney's contribution with moral simplicity, blame him wholly or absolve him completely, would be to misunderstand how inventions interact with societies. Technologies are not moral agents, they amplify human choices. The cotton gin increased productivity, and like all technologies that do so, its effects were shaped by the social context into which it was inserted. Where a society values profit above human dignity, a productivity boost deepens existing injustices. Where a society has norms that protect human rights, that same device might free people from drudgery. In Whitney's case, a well-intentioned mechanical solution fed into an economy that was already inclined toward exploitation. There is another layer to this tale: the cultural and psychological cost. The gin helped normalize a worldview in which efficiency trumped empathy. As the market rewarded cotton, institutions and ideologies sprang up to justify the system that made cotton profitable. Pseudoscientific theories, legal rationalizations, and cultural narratives were used to rationalize slavery. This moral scaffolding allowed ordinary people to sleep with a kind of selective blindness. Plantation owners saw themselves as stewards and patriarchs. Traders saw their businesses as necessary commerce. Politicians negotiated compromises that postponed moral reckonings. Each act of rationalization widened the gulf between principle and practice. Yet history resists one-line summaries. There were always people, enslaved and free, white and black, who recognized the cruelty of the system and fought it in myriad ways. Some resisted quietly, small acts of sabotage, slowing the pace of work, preserving cultural practices. Others escaped, creating the perilous path toward freedom. Abolitionists, though politically marginal in many periods, persisted in moral advocacy, producing literature, speeches, and political movements that kept the conscience of the nation awake. The tension between exploiters and resistors, between profit and principle, between innovation and ethical forethought, made the American story complex and wrenching. So when we stand now, many generations removed, and look back at the cotton gin's provenance, we must hold contradictory truths at once. The gin was a feat of ingenuity. It represents the human capacity to improve processes, to conquer toil with cleverness. That capacity is a noble part of human endeavor. But inventions do not exist in a vacuum. They are nested in social institutions and moral choices. The cotton gin amplified a demand that slavery met only by deepening its reach. The result was the expansion of a cruel economic system, and eventually a national convulsion that cost hundreds of thousands of lives and left legacies that are still being untangled. There is a cautionary tale here for modern times. New technologies, digital platforms, automation, biotechnology arrive bearing promises of convenience and growth. They can also reshape labor, concentrate wealth, and create new inequalities. As with Whitney's mechanical engine, the moral work is not in the widget itself, but in the frameworks that govern how it is used. Laws, incentives, cultural norms, and political courage determine whether a technology lifts people or binds them in new ways. History shows that when economic interests align in favor of concentration of benefit, the longer arc toward justice is lengthened. At the same time, the story invites us to recognize the agency of those who suffered and survived. Enslaved people were not merely passive objects of a system. They resisted, created communities, retained dignity, and contributed immeasurably to the culture and economy. Their labor built wealth, and their resilience shaped the nation. Remembering that helps reframe the narrative from one of mere victimhood to one that honors agency, courage, and the persistent human will to survive and to build meaning even under crushing conditions. In the end, the cotton gin is a mirror. It reflects the paradoxes of progress, the way human ingenuity can produce both blessing and curse, how markets can create prosperity that simultaneously deepens suffering, and how moral clarity can be obscured by convenience and accumulation. The device did not create slavery. It transformed its scale and profitability. It taught a country a hard lesson about the need to couple innovation with moral foresight. If there is a final thought to carry forward, it is this: when invention meets society, responsibility must follow. Inventors and adopters alike are tasked not only with asking whether a thing can be made, but with considering what it will make of us. Will it amplify compassion and equity, or will it be harnessed to reinforce injustice? Today, as ever, that question matters. The story of the cotton gin is not only a chapter in history books, it is an ongoing prompt for reflection about how we build our futures, how we value human life in the calculus of progress, and how we choose to carry the past's burdens or to lighten them. And so, as the morning unrolls across old plantations turned parklands, and as towns now hum with industries that trace roots back to those white fields, the legacy remains visible in cotton bales and in institutions, in laws, and in lingering inequalities. The cotton gin belongs to our collective story, a technical marvel, a catalyst of economic transformation, and a reminder that good and evil are sometimes braided together in the most unexpected inventions. We must keep that complexity before us, neither erasing the ingenuity nor excusing the harm, so that future inventions can be guided by a clearer moral compass, and so that the echoes of that old canker might finally be understood and addressed.